252 million years ago, life on Earth came to a halt. Think about that. Not a setback, but a full stop. This wasn't the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. That was a rounding error by comparison. This was the Great Dying. Before this moment, you would not recognize your own planet. Giant forests of fungi towered 8 meters into the sky. In the oceans, trilobites, creatures that had survived for 270 million years, swarmed in the billions. On land, the dominant predator was not a reptile, but a distant relative of mammals, a gorgonopsid, a beast with the face of a lizard and the fangs of a saber-toothed cat. This was the Permian period, a world teeming with life so strange it feels like science fiction. And it was all about to be erased. The official theories for decades pointed to a sudden impact, a rock from space. But the evidence, written in layers of rock from China to Greenland, tells a different story, a far more terrifying one. This wasn't a quick death. It was an agonizing execution that lasted for 60,000 years. And here's the part nobody talks about. The killer came from within our own planet. In what is now Siberia, the ground split open. Not a single volcano, but a fissure in the Earth's crust stretching for thousands of kilometers. For nearly 1 million years, it bled lava, the Siberian traps. An eruption so vast it would bury the entire United States half a mile deep in molten rock. Think about the sky, blackened with ash, choked with carbon dioxide and sulfur. The rain that fell wasn't water, it was acid. It stripped the forests bare and poisoned the rivers. The oceans, absorbing the heat, warmed by a staggering 10 degrees Celsius. And they became stagnant, starved of oxygen. The water itself turned toxic. And as 96% of all marine life and 70% of terrestrial life suffocated and boiled and starved, a few things survived. But what crawls out of a planetary tomb is never the same as what went in. Life was nearly extinguished. But in the suffocating waters, one organism didn't just endure. It began to thrive, a microbe that would inherit the Earth and make it even more hostile. It was not complex. It had no claws, no teeth, no brain. Its name is Methanosarcina, a microbe, an archaeon, one of the oldest forms of life on the planet. And in the hot, oxygen-starved oceans of the late Permian, it found a paradise. But its sudden dominance wasn't an accident. The evidence for what really happened was buried for 252 million years, until a team at MIT found a genetic smoking gun. You see, the volcanoes were just the first act. They loaded the gun. It was this microbe that pulled the trigger. Let's go back to Siberia. For nearly 1 million years, the Earth bled fire. These weren't the explosive cones you imagine, like Vesuvius. These were fissures. Tears in the planet's skin, hundreds of kilometers long, that poured out curtains of lava. The total volume of erupted basalt is estimated at over 4 million cubic kilometers. Think about that. It's enough lava to cover the entire continent of Australia a kilometer deep. The official report stopped there. A simple story of volcanic winter and runaway greenhouse effect. But what if that wasn't enough? What if the volcanoes were missing a key accomplice? Here's the part nobody talks about. The lava from the Siberian traps was uniquely rich in one specific element: nickel, a trace metal that for most of Earth's history is quite rare. But here it was blasted into the atmosphere and washed into the oceans in unprecedented quantities. For you, nickel is just a coin. For Methanosarcina, it was the missing ingredient. It was a super nutrient that allowed it to process organic matter in a new, devastatingly efficient way. And here's the twist. Right at the extinction boundary, geologists see a sudden vertical spike in the geologic record. A genetic analysis shows Methanosarcina acquired a new set of genes, likely from another microbe. It was a horizontal gene transfer, a biological software update. This update allowed it to feast on the carbon-rich sludge at the bottom of the dying seas. And what is the waste product of this feast? Methane, a greenhouse gas that, over a 20-year period, is more than 80 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. The volcanoes warmed the planet. But this global methane belch from a supercharged microbe, it put the process into overdrive. The oceans, already 10 degrees Celsius warmer, began to suffocate. Hot water holds less dissolved oxygen, a simple fact of chemistry with apocalyptic consequences. Vast stretches of the ocean became anoxic, dead zones, and in these dead zones, a new horror began to stir. Another group of microbes, the sulfate reducers. They thrive without oxygen. Their waste product is hydrogen sulfide. H2S, you know the smell, rotten eggs, but in high concentrations, it's a lethal poison. First, it killed everything left in the water. The trilobites that survived for 270 million years, gone. The sea scorpions, gone. The last reefs on Earth, dissolved. The gas didn't stay in the water. It bubbled up into the atmosphere, turning the sky a sickly greenish yellow. It poisoned the air, killing the plants and animals on land. The gorgonopsids, the top predators on the planet, suffocated in an atmosphere that had become alien to them. But the hydrogen sulfide did one final, terrible thing. It attacked the planet's ozone layer. It shredded it. Earth's shield against hard solar radiation was gone. What the heat didn't boil, and the acid rain didn't dissolve, and the poisoned air didn't choke, was now sterilized by unfiltered ultraviolet rays from the sun. The land was a scorched, silent desert. The oceans were a toxic purple soup. Life was cornered. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. So with every exit sealed, every sanctuary destroyed, how could anything survive? Almost nothing did. But almost is the word upon which the next 250 million years of evolution would be built. The survivors were not the strong. They were the lucky and the small. To understand the world they inherited, you have to understand the precise anatomy of the apocalypse. Because the volcanoes and the microbes, they were just the beginning. The official story often stops there. But the Earth systems were now failing in ways that scientists are only just beginning to piece together. This wasn't one disaster. It was 5, all happening at once. Here's the part that gets left out of the textbooks. The Siberian traps didn't just pour lava over the surface. The magma injected itself sideways, deep underground, into the West Siberian Basin. A region packed with 250 million years of accumulated coal, oil, and gas. Think about that. The Earth's crust was injected with continent-sized sheets of molten rock, cooking the largest fossil fuel deposits on the planet from below. It was a planetary barbecue. The coal seams didn't just burn, they vaporized, releasing an estimated 100,000 gigatons of additional carbon into the air. That number is so large, it's almost meaningless. So let's put it another way. It's more carbon than exists in all of Earth's recoverable fossil fuel reserves today. All of it released in a geological instant. Now, think about the air you're breathing. The CO2 levels became so high they stopped being an indirect killer through heat and became a direct poison. This is called hypercapnia. At a certain concentration, High carbon dioxide in the blood triggers respiratory acidosis. Your own body chemistry turns against you. First comes dizziness, then nausea, then convulsions, unconsciousness, and death. The oceans absorbed so much CO2 that the surface waters became a lethal narcotic for any creature with gills. They suffocated in water that was still full of oxygen. It was a chemical execution. But the planet wasn't done. The acid rain had killed the vast Permian forests. This left behind a world covered in dead, dry wood, a global tinderbox. The extreme heat from the greenhouse effect, combined with lightning from the endless volcanic plumes, ignited it all. Planet-wide wildfires. Fires so vast they created their own weather systems. The smoke and ash blotted out the sun for years by killing off the plankton in the sea and starving the food chain from the bottom up. So, let's recap the situation. If you were an animal on land, the air was a toxic cocktail of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. The rain was acid. The sun was gone, hidden behind a permanent shroud of ash. And the ground itself was on fire. If you were a creature in the sea, the water was 10 degrees too hot. It was acidic. It was starved of oxygen. And it was saturated with enough dissolved CO2 to put you in a coma. Every escape route was a death sentence. Each kill mechanism fed the next in a terrifying feedback loop. More heat meant more methane release from the seabed. More acid rain meant more dead forests to burn. The planet's life support systems had failed completely. It was a cascade failure from which there seemed no return. The Earth was tumbling towards a permanent hothouse state. A second Venus, a sterile rock. And here's the most chilling part. The trigger for this entire planetary collapse was a massive release of greenhouse gases from volcanic activity, warming the planet and causing a cascade of unstoppable feedback loops. A runaway greenhouse effect, a poisoned ocean, a mass extinction driven by carbon. Read that last sentence again. Because the rocks don't lie, and they are telling us a story that sounds disturbingly familiar. That story sounds familiar because the physics of a planet do not change. But for the few who lived through it, this was not a story. It was the world outside their door. Think about what that means. To survive, you couldn't be the strongest or the fastest. You had to be the best at hiding. On the scorched supercontinent of Pangaea, the new masters of the Earth were not fearsome predators. They were burrowers. Meet Lystrosaurus, a creature the size of a pig with a turtle's beak and 2 tusks. Before the extinction, it was an unremarkable herbivore. After, it accounted for 95% of all land vertebrates on the planet. Yes, you heard that right. For a time, nearly every animal you could see on land was a Lystrosaurus. The reason is written in its bones. A barrel chest housed massive lungs, perfectly suited for a low-oxygen atmosphere. And powerful forelimbs meant it could dig. It could escape the acid rain, the toxic air, and the searing heat by going underground. Imagine you are one of them. You emerge from your burrow into a silent world. The sky is a permanent hazy yellow. The air smells of sulfur. There are no birds, no insects buzzing, just the wind kicking up gray ash from a forest that is no longer there. This was not living. It was enduring. And in the oceans, the silence was even more profound. The water was a toxic purple soup, stratified and still. But even here, something clung to life. A paper-thin bivalve named Chloria. It was a disaster specialist. It could tolerate the low oxygen and high sulfide levels that killed nearly everything else. For millions of years, the seafloor was carpeted with nothing but their shells. Think of the irony. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the oceans were free of predators. A perfect sanctuary, because they were already dead. This new world had a name, coined by paleontologists who saw it in the rock record: the Lilliput effect. For 5 million years after the extinction, life was stunted. Survivors were miniatures of their former selves. The first reptiles to evolve were no bigger than your hand. The few sharks that made it were barely a meter long. The planet's engine had stalled. And here's the part that gets left out of the textbooks. For the next 10 million years, no coal was deposited anywhere on Earth. It's called the coal gap. The great forests that create coal were simply gone, wiped from the planet. The world was a ghost of its former self, populated by stunted ghosts. A graveyard waiting for a king. But among the burrowers, hiding from the desolation, was another kind of survivor. A small, furry creature, no bigger than a shrew. A cynodont. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't dominant, but it had warm blood, and it cared for its young. It was a distant, shivering branch of your own family tree. And here is where the story becomes personal. Because everything you are, everything humanity has ever been or ever will be, depended on that one terrified creature surviving one more day in a world that was built to kill it. The planet was a blank slate, and two very different kinds of life were about to compete for the empty throne. One lineage would lead to the thunderous reign of the dinosaurs. The other would lead to you. And for the next 150 million years, your ancestors were going to lose. Sometimes it just means waiting. For the next 150 million years, your ancestors, the cynodonts, played a desperate game of survival in the shadows. They became small, nocturnal, creatures of the undergrowth, while a new dynasty claimed the sunlight. The official name for this new group is Archosauria, the ruling reptiles. But think about what they really were. They were the children of the apocalypse. They inherited a world scrubbed clean by fire and acid, and they were perfectly built for it. Their efficient bird-like lungs could extract more from the oxygen-poor air. Their scaly skin helped them conserve water in a world that had become a global desert. They were fast, they were brutal, and they would give rise to the crocodiles, the pterosaurs, and the dinosaurs. But the textbooks often present this as an instant succession, a neat handover from one king to the next. The reality is much messier and much longer. For 10 million years, the planet was a ghost town. The coal gap in the rock record is a silent testament to this. No forests meant no coal. The oceans, once teeming with reefs, were barren plains of bacterial slime and disaster fauna, like the bivalve chloria. It took 5 million years just for the first complex ecosystems to reappear. 10 million years before forests returned. The Earth's heartbeat had almost stopped, and when it started again, it beat to a different rhythm. This is the part that is often missed. The Great Dying was not just a reset button. It was a filter. It actively selected for new body plans, new metabolisms, new ways of life. It didn't just clear the stage. It rewrote the play. Without the Permian catastrophe, there would be no dinosaurs. Their entire reign was built on the ashes of a world that had to be completely destroyed to make way for them. And here's the twist that brings us to you. Without the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, there would be no age of mammals, no primates, no humans. Each dominant group has stood on the tomb of the one that came before. Each mass extinction is a doorway. We are the children of the last doorway. Our entire civilization, our art, our science, Our fleeting moment in the sun is the result of planetary-scale death. We exist because of a history written in fire, gas, and silence. The rocks tell us this story. They show us the playbook, a runaway greenhouse effect, a poisoned ocean, a mass extinction driven by carbon. But we are the only species in 4 billion years of Earth's history to understand this pattern, to read the warning written in the bones of the world. And that leaves you with a final